video that gets enough of those hidden gem comments. So long story short, if you are interested in more content from me, please be sure to comment the hidden gem down below. That concludes our housekeeping, so let's get into the Lovers Lane murders. In southwestern Atlanta during the late 1970s, young lovers sought out places like Adams Park and West Manor Park as ideal places to carry out their romantic endeavors in darkened seclusion, away from prying eyes. In January of 1977, one such couple would park to enjoy their sweet moment of romance. This moment was meant to be special and time away from people looking into the car, and the last thing they expected was to not be safe, but unfortunately, little did they know that a killer was waiting in the shadows, ready for an opportunity to strike. When the killer did appear, he quickly shot 6 rounds at the young lovers, fatally wounding both of them in what would be the first murders in this bizarre crime spree. Over the course of a 3-month period in 1977, 3 black couples were gunned down inside of their cars at 2 city parks, attacked by a killer who acted without any apparent motivation and who left very little evidence that would most certainly not help reveal his identity. Now, at the time, this would be the biggest murder case in Atlanta in more than 20 years. Now, although 3 victims would survive these bizarre attacks over the course of a few months, unfortunately, they would not be able to offer really much of any information about their attacker. So it was very hard for police to figure out who was responsible for this. Then one day, after a few months of these couples being killed or attacked, the killings would suddenly just stop out of the blue. And by the 1980s, this case eventually went cold and no suspects were ever identified. During the early morning hours of a very cold January morning in 1977, witnesses would report to police that a car had been driving erratically and out of control onto an intersection before hitting a street sign near Adams Park in Atlanta, Georgia. Officers would be called to the scene at this reporting of an erratic driver, and when the officers arrived, they would find 2 people in the vehicle, both of whom were without clothing as his victim of choice, ambushing them as they sat in cars parked at secluded spots and lovers' lanes. But the difference was that the lovers' lane killer in Atlanta remained silent and never communicated with authorities, choosing instead to disappear back into from wherever it was that he emerged. On January 16th of 1977, police were called to the scene of a crash at the intersection near Adams Park in southwestern Atlanta. Witnesses came forward to explain how the car had driven at full speed and crashed into a street sign. Upon searching inside of the vehicle, they would come across a 20-year-old LeBrian Lovett and 26-year-old Veronica Hill, also naked with gunshot wounds. LeBrian Lovett was found in the driver's seat with wounds to his head, stomach, right leg, and left arm. Veronica Hill was found in the back seat of the car under a coat with wounds to her left leg and her abdomen. Although both were still alive when they were rushed to the hospital, they too would soon succumb to their injuries. Witnesses would report that they saw the couple driving towards Adam Park, which was a notorious hangout spot for couples to engage in having sex. From the evidence that was at the crime scene, it appeared that LeBrian Lovett and Veronica Hill were deep in the throes of romance when this killer walked right up to the car and began firing. Despite being severely wounded by the number of gunshots, LeBrian Lovett did manage to drive off, but unfortunately his attempt would be hampered by his injuries and he would lose control of the car before crashing into a bus stop sign. Before Veronica was pronounced dead, the only thing that she was able to state was that she was shot by a friend of hers, but she was never able to provide a name, according to Atlanta Homicide Sergeant Raymond Layton. But with this information, knowing that perhaps this person was connected to Veronica, police would look into her friends and ex-boyfriends, but unfortunately were never able to find a solid lead and would eventually rule out any involvement. The only evidence that had been left at the crime scene by this mysterious killer were the bullets and empty shell casings. Upon analysis, it was determined that the gun used by the killer was a .38 caliber weapon. With very few leads, the police had little avenues to investigate, but it wasn't long before this killer would strike again. At around 2 a.m. on February 12th of 1977, a young couple was having sex in a parked car in West Manor Park, which was located in southwest Atlanta, when an unknown individual scene on foot, realizing that he wasn't gonna make any progress. Fortunately, these teens were very much lucky to be alive, and although they had serious injuries, they would be taken to the hospital where they actually made a full recovery. Now, these two would be questioned by detectives, and Dennis Langston would say that a black man with a gun had tried to open the car doors and said, quote, "All we could see was glass and fire from the trigger." The two teens would say that they were able to get a quick look at the shooter, but really were only able to give detectives a vague description, which was really just identifying him as a tall, black male. The bullets fired by this perpetrator would be recovered from the scene, and also upon analysis were determined that they came from the same .38 caliber gun that had killed LaBrian Lovett and Veronica Hill just a month earlier. Almost a month later, a third attack happened at Adams Park, which was the scene of the first murders. This time, 20-year-old Diane Collins and her fiancé, Gordon Whitfield, who was 21, had gone to the park on the evening of March 2nd of 1977. They had gone on a date to the movies earlier in the evening, and before going home for the night, intended on closing out their time together at Lover's Lane. Unfortunately, as the two would sit in the car together, they did not notice the gunman. The gunman, as he approached the vehicles and began firing. 6 bullets would be fired into the passenger side window, killing Diane Collins immediately. Gordon Whitfield would be wounded in the jaw and the neck by one of the rounds, but managed to drive the car to his home, where he was able to call for an ambulance, which is pretty incredible. So I am curious if he drove all the way home, and I say all the way home as if I actually know how far away he was, but I imagine Diane's body was still in the car with him, and he was probably bleeding pretty aggressively. So that's quite a tragic situation, but that is all I could find about that drive to make the call to the ambulance. Gordon would be able to survive this encounter with the Lover's Lane killer, but just like the other surviving victims, really could offer very little information as to the person's identity. Once again, the bullets fired by the killer were tested against those from the other crimes, and yet again were a match to the same gun. So at this point, Atlanta detectives were very much aware that they were dealing with a serial killer who was preying on unsuspecting couples that were frequenting the city parks. But still, the motives behind these murders were absolutely baffling to police. The killer was not at all interested in sexual assault or even robbing these victims. It was legitimately just about cold-blooded murder. really share much of any information about the crimes to the public, meaning that appeals for information from the public who may be able to give insight, or maybe somebody heard something, any kind of tip at all, never came forward because the police just didn't ask for it. A reporter at the time would say that it was of the belief that the police intentionally left the media and the public in the dark. He also felt like if this had been talked about publicly or broadcast in the news, it would create absolute hysteria and could create a public panic when the police would be pressured to provide answers that they didn't have. So, to an extent, I understand that, but I also think it's interesting that they didn't ask for tips or help. According to Atlanta Homicide Sergeant Raymond Layton, he would say that the police officers at the time were poring back over repeat offenders that lived in the area that had been related to other crimes. But again, there was such little evidence that, and such a vague description of this killer, that police felt as though they were chasing a ghost. Now, being that they were at these parks at night, they were sitting in fairly poor lit areas because they wanted to be in the dark, because again, these were younger couples going to have sex, so they don't want to be wide out in the open. And because of this and the way that they positioned themselves, they were not able to see their assailant coming towards them. And of course, in the chaos of being shot at, it would be very hard to identify the person or even be able to process what that person looked like. And the only reason, I guess, that the police felt like they were confident in the fact that they were really dealing with a serial killer was that they had the ballistic testing of the murder weapons and that they were all .38 caliber guns. Around the time of the third attack, a man by the name of Ken Willis was tipped off by a receptionist at Atlanta Police Headquarters. He would say, quote, "One of them motioned me over and said, 'There's a really big assault case buried in the burglary file,' end quote. The Atlanta police were trying to keep their investigation a closely guarded secret, as I mentioned. And according to Ken Willis, who was a reporter, would say that they started to understand that the police had information that they were not disclosing. And he felt that if there was a murderer going around the parks in Atlanta and the newspaper caught wind of it, that they had a duty to disclose it. Also, around this time, investigators began to notice a precise pattern in the dates of the shootings. Each of the crimes were preceded by a certain number of days, and the shooter was striking continuously every month. They began to theorize that the killer was following a 3-week schedule, with the second shooting occurring 26 days after the first shooting, and the third shooting occurring 28 days after the second. They thought that if the killer was following this 3-week schedule, then he would keep his pattern and strike sometime between the 6th and 8th of April that year. And according to Willis, when he was looped in on this this information, he would say, quote, "They knew that if they broadcast it, that the killer would be onto them," end quote. So this does explain a little bit as to why the police did not release information. So at this time, the newspaper that Willis worked for had agreed to not publish any stories until around the time of this fourth murder that they were theorizing would happen. Beginning on the weekend of March 20th of 1977, police carried out an elaborate plan to catch this killer. 40 officers were placed on duty at both Adams Park and West Manor Park, where the attacks were carried out before. 4 police decoys were used, consisting of 2 male officers and 2 female officers, posing as couples and who were parked in specially equipped vehicles in the event they were attacked. However, the killer would not show up that night as they had hoped. Despite this, though, they did not give up hope, and there would be a number of police stakeouts that took place. Between April 6th and April 8th, undercover cops would scope out Adams Park and West Manor Park, waiting yet again for the killer to strike. Now the first day turned up nothing, which wasn't surprising because the 3-week schedule theory was only speculation to them. However, the killer would also not appear on the 7th or 8th. And this would be the time that the killer never struck again. And it was then that it appeared the killings had stopped just as abruptly as they had begun, and their suspect had vanished. And the theory behind why he vanished is because perhaps he was able to figure out that there had been a sting operation in March to capture him, and he realized that police were onto him. But that is the theory that I came across. It was finally decided that on Tuesday, April 19th of 1977, that the public should be informed of this killing spree that had transpired, and so authorities would reveal the existence of the murders. The press soon dubbed the Phantom Killer the Lover's Lane Killer. Okay, so the hidden gem of this case is that the Lover's Lane Killer was a phantom killer, and they had no idea who he was. Another homicide detective that had been assigned to the case would say that the method of operation used by this killer was the same in all 3 cases. The suspect approached the victim's car without a word, knelt in a crouch-like position, and then fired his pistol 6 times, emptying them into his victims. The ammunition that was used was a flat-nosed type of ammunition. He explained the cycle used by the killer, who was attacking every 28 days or so on the middle weekend of the month. And according to the pattern that they suspected, as we know, the killer should have struck in the week prior, but did not. Homicide detectives had also hoped that by revealing this information to the public finally, that they may flush out the killer or cause him to make a mistake. But this never happened, and he remained the Phantom Killer. police would still continue investigating the murders. But around 2 years later, in 1979, they would admit that there had been not a single new lead or new suspect in the case. By 1980, police had said that the investigation into the Lovers Lane shootings had come to a dead end, and no new suspects had been found. The killings had stopped, and the Lovers Lane killer never struck again. A crime scene investigator, Cheryl McCollum, would say, quote, "It could be that he was dormant for 10 years, and then when he did move on and reoffended, it was in such a different way that we didn't notice they were connected at all." Notice they were connected at all, end quote. She would also say that there was no historical data like newspaper or things like that. There was no video footage. There was literally nothing. And on cases like that, you literally have to start from zero. She would also say that she believed the killer had likely bragged about the crimes that he committed. She would say, quote, "They always tell somebody, always, so maybe somebody will come forward," end quote. Detectives had also spent time later on after this attempting to track down stored evidence, including a blood sample that they did find at one of the crime scenes, because in 1977 they were only able to test the blood to determine the blood type. The science wasn't far enough along to be able to match the DNA profiles in the blood, but as time has gone on, we know that we now have the capability to do that. Despite this, though, in the hopes that advancing technology would help, still no suspect has ever been apprehended in the over 40 years since the attacks occurred. Only one thing is for certain. After the killer vanished in March of 1977, the couples who frequented Atlanta's solitary Lovers Lane were most likely safe from this dangerous killer